Under the bright studio lights, the audience erupted in laughter on live television. The host, known for her sarcasm and provocative style, mocked Jack Black's faith with a smug smile. She asked, "You, Jack, do you really believe there's someone up there watching over you, especially after everything you've been through?" The laughter intensified as the camera focused on Jack. He remained silent, gently holding the small cross hanging from his neck. His eyes were calm, steady, and unshaken. He didn't react, didn't argue. He simply felt. Then a deep, intense voice cut through the noise. What the host didn't know was that she was about to experience a moment that would not only challenge her perspective on faith, but possibly change her life. Jack Black isn't just a Hollywood star. He's the embodiment of someone who has lost everything yet still stands. Not because of fame, not because of strength, but because of something the world tried to ridicule that night: faith. Stay with us until the end to see how this story unfolds. Falls. And hey, before we begin, tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from. We love hearing from you and always read everything. The studio was lit like an arena, with overhead lights crisscrossing above and reflecting off sleek black walls. The audience clapped and cheered, buzzing with anticipation, as if about to witness a comedy show, a scandal, or maybe both. The show was known for its controversy, sarcasm, and interviews that felt more like verbal duels. The host walked onto the stage, and the crowd erupted. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, "he's an actor, producer, motorcycle lover, a living legend, and apparently a bit of a monk too. Please welcome with thunderous applause the man, the myth, Jack Black." The cheers were deafening. Jack stepped in with calm strides, wearing dark jeans, a black blazer, a simple t-shirt, and subtly hanging from his neck, a cross necklace. The accessory contrasted with his otherwise understated look. But more than that, it seemed to carry a deeper significance. He nodded in greeting and smiled softly. No rush, no grand gesture. He took his seat like someone who had faced many challenges in life and saw this as just another. The first few questions followed the expected path: career, recent films, behind-the-scenes moments. Jack answered gently and deliberately, maintaining a light mood. The audience laughed, but gradually, as was typical of this show, the tone began to shift. "Jack," the host said with a sly grin, "you seem like a grounded guy, maybe even spiritual. But tell me something. Do you really believe in miracles? After everything Hollywood has shown you? After everything life's taken from you?" The audience laughed. Jack didn't. His eyes remained calm but reflective. He didn't answer immediately. He simply listened. Silence, the most spiritual kind of response. The host quipped, prompting more laughter. Jack lowered his eyes for a second, gently touching the cross necklace with his fingers. A simple, almost unnoticeable gesture, but full of meaning. The camera zoomed in slightly on the cross as it swayed softly with the motion of his hand. Then he looked up, calm, direct, and still silent, just present. The conversation moved forward, filled with more jokes about spirituality mixed with ironic comments about faith, dogma, and religion as an emotional escape. The audience laughed again, but something in the air had shifted. A quiet crack in the show's usual rhythm. Then came a more pointed question. "Do you really think there's someone up there watching over you?" Jack remained silent for a few seconds. The audience waited. It was a crucial moment. One wrong word, and he'd become another meme. But if his words were true, maybe something would change that night. Then he spoke, his voice calm and steady, barely above a whisper. "If I'm still standing after everything, it wasn't just luck." His words landed like a stone dropped in still water, and a ripple of silence spread across the room. The laughter stopped and people exchanged glances, as if silently asking one another, "Did you feel that too?" The camera cut back to the necklace. The cross now seemed heavier, more real. Not a decoration, but a declaration. The host tried to shift gears with another joke, but the laughter was faint. Something had changed. Jack remained steady, never combative, never defensive, just observant and present. What no one realized was that on that show, Jack's cross wouldn't just be a symbol. It would be the trigger for a turning point no one was prepared to witness. The studio lights dimmed slightly as the conversation continued. The energy in the room had shifted since Jack's quiet declaration. What had begun as a typical night of entertainment now lingered in a strange space somewhere between discomfort and reflection. The host leaned forward with a forced smile. The mood hadn't gone where she wanted, but she wasn't done yet. "So Jack, let's talk religion, since we're already here," she said. The audience chuckled again, but not as freely as before. She began to speak in a more animated tone, sprinkling sarcasm throughout her words. "You know what I always say," she smirked. "Religion is like a fairy tale for people who are scared to grow up. All that divine plan stuff, comforting, sure, but not exactly real." The laughter was louder now. A few people clapped. It was clear they were warming back up to the routine. Jack didn't flinch. He didn't roll his eyes or shift in his seat. He didn't even sigh. He simply held the cross again, not clutching it, not making a show, just resting his fingers against it as if grounding himself. The camera caught it again. There was no panic in his body language, no defensiveness, just stillness. As the audience enjoyed the jokes and jabs, the screen subtly began to shift. A narrator's voice broke in, gentle, thoughtful, and distant. What the world saw on that stage was a man being tested, but what they didn't see was the road that led him there. The screen faded into grainy, gray-toned images, showing moments from Jack's past. A funeral, a tiny casket, Jack standing beside it wearing black, motionless, his face empty. A flash of a hospital hallway, a blurred photo of him holding hands with someone off camera. A subway car years later, Jack alone staring out the window. A book in his lap, unread. The loss of his daughter, the death of his partner, his best friend gone. And yet not once did he let bitterness define him. His grief became grace, his silence a form of prayer. The montage paused, then came real voices, testimonies unscripted and raw. A rideshare driver. "He tipped me $500. I thought it was a mistake. He just smiled and said, 'You were kind, the world needs more of that.' A woman, I saw him at a gas station. My car was overheating. He didn't just help, he stayed for an hour. No cameras, no rush." A fan, I was crying in the street. He sat down next to me like he knew me. He didn't ask why I was crying, he just listened. Back in the studio, the host was still talking, trying to provoke a reaction. She quoted Bible verses with theatrical exaggeration, mocking the tone of old sermons. "The meek shall inherit the earth." "Yeah, well, good luck with that in LA, she laughed. The audience responded, but with less conviction. Something was off. The room wasn't as loud as before. There were longer silences between the laughs now. Jack remained quiet, still. The host turned to him again, now with a tinge of frustration in her voice. "You're really not going to say anything? I mean, do you seriously believe there's someone out there looking out for you?" For the first time that night, Jack looked directly at her. There was no sharpness in his gaze, just depth. Then he spoke. "If I'm still here, if I'm still standing after everything, it wasn't just luck." The audience went silent for the second time that night. The energy dropped, not in boredom, but in reverence. Even the cameras seemed to slow down. It wasn't just what he said, it was how he said it. No theatrics, no performance, just truth. The audience fell silent for the first time. The laughter stopped. But what was coming next would shake everything people thought they knew about faith, pain, and redemption. The audience sat in suspended quiet, the kind of silence that feels like it's waiting for something to break. But Jack didn't speak again. He didn't need to. He sat there, his fingers still lightly resting on the cross, not hiding it, not displaying it, just being. The host, sensing she might have pushed too far, shifted in her seat and gave a strained chuckle. "Well, that got heavy," she said, trying to pull the tone back to familiar ground. "Maybe we should talk about stunts or puppies or something lighter." A few nervous laughs trickled from the crowd, but they quickly faded. The atmosphere had changed. Something deeper now ran beneath the surface. On the screen, the narrator's voice returned. "What does it mean to have faith in silence? To carry pain without letting it become bitterness? Jack never preached. He never posted sermons. But his life told a story. The screen faded to black and white flashbacks, not from films, but from real moments. Jack at a cemetery, standing alone at his daughter's funeral, his eyes vacant, hands clenched into the sleeves of his coat. A man hollowed by loss. Another flash years later, a subway train in New York. He sat among strangers, unnoticed, hunched quietly in a corner seat, his head tilted slightly, as if listening to a world no one else could hear. There is a weight some carry, and carry alone, not because they are trying to be strong, but because the world no longer gives them another choice. Testimonies filled the soundscape again, this time layered and overlapping. A crew member on set. He always showed up early, never complained. One day he noticed I was limping and offered me his chair. I was just background staff. A nurse. My mom was dying. We were in the same hospital. He sat with us for 50 minutes, never said he was famous, just present. A man in a hoodie, face blurred. He paid for my brother's surgery. No interviews, no articles. I only found out because the hospital called. Back in the studio, the host smiled tightly and leaned toward Jack again. You know, people like to romanticize suffering. They say pain makes us deeper, more human. But I think pain is just pain, right? It doesn't make you wiser. It just ruins things. She laughed bitterly. Jack didn't interrupt. He just listened, maintaining that same steady, open presence. Not to argue, but to witness. The host exhaled and waved her hand as if brushing it all off. I mean, look, you wear a cross, that's fine, but you don't actually think it means anything, right? It's just fashion, symbolic, right? The room waited. Jack turned his gaze slowly toward her. His voice was steady, but with a quiet edge that hadn't been there before. I don't wear it for fashion, he said. I wear it for memory, for forgiveness, for survival. His words weren't dramatic. They were lived in, like he'd said them to himself many times in the dark when no one was watching. The camera zoomed slightly on the necklace. This time, it didn't just look like an object. It looked like a story, one the world was just beginning to read. The host went silent. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. The audience was hushed. No phones, no shifting, no laughter, just presence. The narrator's voice returned once more. In a world obsessed with loud opinions, there is something unnerving and sacred about someone who chooses to simply live what they believe. Jack didn't add anything else. He just breathed in and out, holding space. The host cleared her throat and smiled again. But this time it didn't quite land. Something was cracking, not on stage but inside her. What no one expected was that the person who mocked him the most was about to reveal something that would completely shift the course of the show and her own life. The show returned from a commercial break, but something in the air was different. The studio was quieter. The audience, once so ready to laugh at anything, now sat with eyes wide open, hearts strangely attentive. Even the lighting felt softer, as if the cameras knew this next part wasn't scripted. The host returned to her seat. She looked composed, but not like before. Her smile was there, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. She glanced at Jack, then down at her hands. One of them trembled slightly. She tried to laugh it off, but her voice cracked. Okay, she said, almost to herself. Let's talk about something real. Jack didn't move. He just waited, patient, grounded, ready. The host took a deep breath and leaned forward, her tone lower now, stripped of the usual performance. When I was little, she began, I used to pray every night. I'd close my eyes tight and ask God to make me normal. I didn't even know what that meant. I just thought maybe if I was normal, I wouldn't be scared all the time. I wouldn't feel wrong. The audience sat still. The silence was no longer tense. It was sacred. She kept speaking, her eyes glassy now. And I'd pray, please don't let me go to hell. Please just let me be enough the way I am. But nothing happened. I kept waiting for a sign, a voice, anything. She paused, took a breath. Eventually, I stopped asking, and then I started laughing at all of it, at the prayers, at the books, at the people who still believed. I told myself, it's all fiction, just a security blanket for people who can't deal with the world. She laughed softly, not mocking but broken. Maybe I didn't laugh at your faith, Jack. Maybe I laughed at my pain. Jack looked at her gently, with no judgment, no pity, just compassion. The camera captured his face as he leaned in, speaking quietly. No one who suffers while praying is ever alone. Someone always hears, even if you didn't realize it. For a moment, nothing moved. A woman in the audience wiped away a tear. Another held her breath. The host blinked slowly, her facade slipping further with every second. I used to think silence meant no one was listening, she whispered. But maybe I just didn't know how to listen. The camera slowly zoomed out, showing both of them sitting there. No spotlight, no dramatic music, just two people raw and uncovered in front of millions. Jack didn't speak again. He didn't need to. The host looked at him, really looked, and nodded almost imperceptibly, as if to say thank you. Or maybe, I'm still here. The narrator's voice returned, low and thoughtful. Sometimes the hardest part of healing is admitting you need it. And sometimes the most powerful confession is simply telling the truth. But that moment of vulnerability was far from the end. What no one in the studio knew was that behind the scenes, something even more revealing was about to explode, and not even the cameras could contain what came next. Hours after the show aired, clips began to spread like wildfire online. Jack's quiet presence, the trembling in the host's voice, the way the studio had fallen into silence. It all felt different, authentic, something that couldn't be manufactured. But behind the scenes, things were starting to unravel. A video recorded in secret by someone backstage began to circulate on social media. At first, it seemed like nothing, just the usual chatter of producers during a commercial break. But then, a voice, clear and sharp, cut through. "We want the God stuff pushed," the voice said. "She needs to poke him, get him to react. That's what drives clips." Another voice replied, "You sure he's not the type who fights back?" "Exactly. That makes it better." The video went viral within minutes. At first, it looked like just more behind-the-scenes gossip, but soon after, a former producer stepped forward in a live post. He spoke to the camera, visibly nervous but resolute. "I worked on that show for 3 years. There were always instructions, unspoken, sometimes written, to go after people who spoke about faith. It wasn't about curiosity, it was about triggering reactions, especially with spiritual guests. That's what the network wanted. More tension, more clicks." He hesitated, then added, "I saw the script notes for tonight's episode. They wanted her to go after Jack." Hard screenshots followed. Internal memos suggested lines, jokes meant to provoke, prompts crafted specifically to mock. The hashtag #RespectFaith began trending within hours. What had started as a simple interview now looked more like a staged ambush. But the plan had backfired because Jack hadn't fought. He hadn't shouted. He hadn't even tried to win. He had simply stayed true. More voices joined the storm online. This idea of actors, musicians, people from all walks of life. There's strength in stillness. Faith doesn't need to be loud to be powerful. What happened to respect? This man carried more grace and silence than the show did in its entire runtime. Even people with no religious ties chimed in, not defending belief systems, but defending the right to believe. The tone had shifted. The host stayed quiet for a while. No posts, no comments. Then late that night, a tweet appeared on her account. "Some moments on live TV aren't scripted, they're human. Tonight I was human and I'm still processing what that means." The comments flooded in, some angry, some forgiving, many simply asking one question. Why? Backstage leaks continued. One former assistant posted, "They told us Jack wouldn't make noise, that he was too polite to push back. But what they didn't count on was that his silence would say everything." News outlets picked up the story. Journalists debated it. Faith leaders weighed in. Psychologists were invited onto morning shows to analyze the emotional impact of moral stillness in modern media. Even satire programs covered it, but with a strange reverence, admitting it's weird. But something about that moment made us all stop laughing. In the midst of the chaos, Jack didn't respond publicly. No interviews, no statements, no quotes. But he posted one thing, a single image. his cross resting on top of a closed book. No caption. The post was shared over 6 million times in a day. People wrote their own interpretations in the comments. For the quiet warriors, faith under fire, the book is closed, but the message speaks. In the days that followed, the conversation only grew. Think pieces flooded in from all sides, some praising Jack's composure, others critiquing the show's ethics, and many exploring the deeper cultural hunger for meaning in a world that often mocks belief. The host was eventually interviewed by another network. She looked tired, stripped of glamour. Her voice was soft. "I didn't expect to feel anything. I really didn't. But he didn't argue. He didn't mock me back. He just listened. And I think that did something to me." What began as an interview had become a cultural reckoning. But in the next live broadcast, when Jack returned to the stage, something happened that no camera, no script, no social media feed could have predicted. The network didn't hesitate. Barely a week after the first interview aired, they announced a second appearance. Jack Black live again. This time, the promotion was different. No sarcasm, no catchy taglines, just the promise of a conversation that moved the world. When the night came, the studio was full. Lines wrapped around the block, people holding signs not of protest but of presence. Silence speaks. Faith is not a fault. More Jack, less noise. Inside, the energy was electric, not like before where everyone waited to laugh, but now as if something important was about to unfold, a collective breath held in anticipation. Jack entered the studio the same way he had before, quietly, calm, wearing the same cross around his neck. The host greeted him, visibly nervous, her tone gentler, measured, a hint of vulnerability in her voice. "Jack," she began, "thanks for coming back." He nodded, offered a small smile. "Thanks for the invitation." She opened with a soft question, something about how he felt after the last interview. But before he could answer, something strange happened. The lights flickered, not a subtle dim, a sudden sharp pulse. The monitors behind them glitched for a moment. The audience gasped quietly. A sound technician leaned forward in the booth. And then, total silence. The microphones cut out. The lights dimmed to near black. The hum of the studio vanished. For 10 seconds, the entire set fell into a stillness so complete it felt otherworldly. Jack didn't move. He sat, hands gently resting on his lap, the cross visible under the soft glow of emergency lights. The host looked at him, frozen. No one in the audience moved. No one spoke. Even the crew seemed unsure whether to intervene. Then everything snapped back. Lights stabilized, sound returned, screens refreshed. But something had changed. The host sat in stunned silence. Her eyes welled up, not from fear, from something else, something internal. She turned to Jack, her voice shaking. "I don't know what that was." Jack looked at her with quiet certainty. "It wasn't about winning a debate," he said softly. "It was about touching a soul." And for a moment, the world stopped again. The audience didn't applaud. They didn't shout. They just sat with him, with her, with themselves. It was as if for one breath in time, every person in that room remembered something they had forgotten. Stillness, presence, reverence. The narrator's voice returned. "There are moments that logic can't explain, moments that science may try to label malfunction, coincidence, glitch. But what if it wasn't any of that? What if for a heartbeat of time, the world bowed to something unseen?" Later, technicians would blame the silence on a system reboot and overvoltage, a studio bug, but no one truly believed that. Not after what they saw in her eyes, not after the way Jack sat unmoved as if he had expected it, not after the way it felt. That clip, 10 seconds of darkness followed by 10 seconds of silence, would become the most viewed moment in the show's history. And not because anything was said, but because everything was felt. That moment, which seemed like a mere technical glitch, would become one of the most replayed, analyzed, and deeply personal videos ever shared online. And what Jack would do after that would reach even the hardest of hearts. The video of the silence, That 10-second pause during the live show exploded across the internet. It was everywhere. Talk shows replayed it, analysts slowed it down, podcasts turned it into metaphor. Some claimed it was a glitch, others swore it was divine, but what no one could deny was this: it had changed people. Millions watched it not once, but over and over, not to understand what happened, but to feel again what it made them feel. That strange stillness, that unexplainable peace in a world constantly talking. It had said more than any argument ever could. Jack didn't issue a statement. He didn't do interviews. He didn't explain. He simply posted a single photo: a wooden table, a well-worn book closed on top, his cross resting gently over it. The caption: "Sometimes silence is the most powerful answer." It didn't need to trend. It didn't need hashtags. It found its own way into people's hearts. The host posted her own message a day later. No makeup, no lighting, just her looking directly into her phone camera. Her voice was clear, softer. "I didn't know what I was doing that night. I thought I was in control. I thought the goal was to win. But he didn't try to win. He just held space. A pause. And maybe, just maybe, God did speak to me that night, and I finally stopped laughing long enough to listen." The internet didn't cancel her. To everyone's surprise, it embraced her because people saw something in her breakdown. Not weakness, not a fall from grace, but a moment of honesty, a moment that mirrored something in themselves. Soon after, a wave began. The hashtag #MyFaithIsNotAfault flooded social media, not in protest for Jack, but in testimony. People of all beliefs and of none, stories came pouring in. A woman wrote, "I stopped wearing my necklace after a friend mocked it. I just put it back on." A teenager, "I never believed in anything, but maybe I can start believing in peace." A man from Brazil, "My mom used to pray for me. I always rolled my eyes. Today I thanked her." Churches, mosques, synagogues, and meditation circles all shared the same phrase: faith doesn't need to shout. Meanwhile, news networks invited specialists. Some tried to explain the silence moment with technology, a voltage dip, a software misfire, but others went deeper. One neurologist said, "The body responds to that clip like it does to sacred music. Slow heartbeat, reduced cortisol. What happened there affected people on a physiological level." A therapist said, "We're not used to people holding space without fighting." That moment was a reset, emotionally, culturally. It wasn't about agreeing or disagreeing anymore. It was about remembering something we'd all forgotten: that grace, presence, and truth don't have to come with volume. Back at the studio, the host stepped away from the show. No scandal, no headlines. She simply posted, "Some conversations are more important than content. Thank you, Jack." He didn't reply publicly, but one day later, a photo appeared. A candle lit beside a folded note that said simply, "You were heard." The narrator returned for one final reflection. Jack Black didn't try to preach. He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He carried pain without making it a weapon. And in a world addicted to noise, he reminded us, faith isn't weakness, and silence can be holy. As the final scenes played, a montage began. A child in a hospital room watching the clip and whispering, "That's what calm looks like." A father hugging his daughter at the airport, both wearing crosses. A group of strangers gathered on a rooftop in silence, phones turned off, just breathing. And finally, Jack walking alone through a quiet park, the sun setting behind him, the cross resting gently against his chest. And maybe this story was never about television. Maybe it was never about Jack. Maybe this was the beginning of something waking up inside all of us, the kind of faith that doesn't need to shout to be heard.